Henry Mathis didn't believe in second chances until a barefoot little girl holding a baby outside a hospital made him stop walking and for the first time in years start feeling. Henry Mathis believed in results, not emotions. He built his empire through discipline, efficiency, and an unwavering belief that logic always trumped empathy. His schedule was meticulously planned, his conversations calculated, and his compassion non-existent as far as he was concerned. He walked through the city like a man on a mission, never slowing down, never looking around. So when he approached the hospital that Thursday afternoon, it was with the same intention he always carried, to finalize a medical partnership that would expand his company's pharmaceutical reach and increase quarterly profits. He wasn't there to notice anyone. And yet, for reasons he couldn't explain, he did. Near the stone steps leading to the hospital entrance, Henry saw a small shape out of the corner of his eye. A little girl, barely 6, if that, was sitting motionless, holding what looked like a bundle of blankets. At first, he thought she was waiting for someone. But as he drew closer, he noticed her eyes, wide, clear, and exhausted. Her arms were tightly wrapped around an infant swaddled in a pink blanket. The baby's tiny face just barely visible through the folds. The girl's blonde hair was tangled, and her thin frame looked too small for the task of carrying anyone, let alone protecting another human being. Henry stopped walking. It wasn't in his nature to stop. But something about the stillness of the child, her silence, and the chaos of the hospital entrance made him pause. She wasn't crying. She wasn't begging. She was just holding on. He crouched slowly, keeping his voice calm. "Are you all right? Are you lost?" he asked. His voice, usually firm and commanding, softened without him realizing it. The girl didn't flinch, but she looked up at him with a tired expression far too old for her face. "No, we're not lost," she said quietly. "My sister needs milk. Mommy's in a coma." Henry blinked, caught off guard by the bluntness of her answer. He looked at the baby more closely now. The child was no older than a few months, cheeks pale, eyes closed, one tiny hand peeking from the blanket. The girl held her like she'd done it before, like this wasn't the first time she'd had to be the adult. "Where's your father?" he asked gently. "We don't have one," the girl said. "He left when I was little. Then Mommy had Rose. That's her name." Her voice trembled slightly, but she didn't cry. "When Mommy got hurt in the crash, they took us to the children's place. But they didn't take care of Rose. They just left her in a room. So, I waited until they weren't watching, and I took her. I had to." Henry felt something unfamiliar stir in his chest, something sharp and tight that refused to go away. He stood and looked around. People passed by without noticing the scene unfolding at their feet. A security guard at the door eyed him, but said nothing. The girl, meanwhile, adjusted the blanket around her sister and tried to keep her steady. Henry knew what he should do. Alert child services, step back, let the system handle it. But his feet didn't move. Instead, he reached into his coat, pulled out his phone, and called his assistant. "Cancel the meeting," he said quietly. "I've got something more important." When he looked down again, the girl was watching him, unsure whether to trust him or run. He offered his hand. "Let's go inside just to get your sister warm and fed. You can hold her the whole time if you want." She stared for a moment, then nodded slowly. Her fingers clutched the infant tightly as she stood. Henry led them through the doors and into the hospital, not knowing where this was going. Only that for once he wasn't walking away. Inside the hospital, Henry guided the little girl toward the reception desk, but instead of announcing her presence to the staff, he gently steered her into a quieter waiting area tucked off to the side. The space was warmer, quieter with soft lighting and a few cushioned chairs that looked rarely used. He didn't want to overwhelm her or the baby. Not yet. She sat down carefully, cradling her sister as if the world might still try to pull her away. Henry crouched again, making eye contact and speaking with a tone he barely recognized as his own. "What's your name?" he asked. She hesitated as though weighing whether to speak. Then she said, "Lily, and this is Rose." Henry nodded, storing the names like they mattered more than anything else on his calendar. He pulled out his phone again and made another call, not to his board or to a driver, but directly to a pediatrician he had worked with during a corporate-sponsored program. He didn't explain everything, only said he needed someone he trusted urgently. Within minutes, a nurse appeared at the edge of the waiting area and took in the sight of Lily and the baby without asking questions. Henry stood and met her gaze. "Her name is Rose. She hasn't eaten. She's cold. She's been in a bad place." The nurse nodded and gently approached Lily. Lily looked up, clearly torn between fear and instinct. The nurse crouched beside her and smiled. "You can stay with her the whole time, sweetheart. No one's taking her away." Lily finally allowed the nurse to examine the baby while still keeping Rose in her arms. Henry stepped back and watched as Rose was checked for vital signs, her temperature taken, her breathing monitored. The baby didn't fuss much. She was tired, underfed, and far too quiet for her age. While the examination continued, Henry spoke with the doctor in the hallway. He described what little he knew and asked what needed to be done immediately. The pediatrician, a calm woman named Dr. Kinnear, explained that Rose needed formula, warmth, and observation for a few days. "She's fragile," the doctor said softly. "But this little girl, Lily, she's done something extraordinary. She's kept that baby alive under conditions that would break most adults." Henry said nothing, but inside something shifted. He walked back to the waiting area with a purpose he hadn't felt in years. Lily sat alone again, bottle now in hand, feeding Rose with quiet concentration. Her fingers were still trembling, but she kept her focus on her sister, brushing her hair aside when it got in the way. Henry didn't interrupt. He waited until the bottle was empty, until Rose had dozed off in her arms before speaking again. "Do you want to come with me? Just for tonight. Somewhere safe, warm, where you won't have to hide." Lily didn't answer right away. She looked at the baby, then up at him. "Only if I can hold her the whole time." Henry nodded. "That's a promise." An hour later, after filing a temporary notice with the hospital and agreeing to bring Rose back for observation, Henry helped Lily into the back seat of his car. She refused to sit in a booster seat, too afraid to let go of her sister, so he buckled her in as she was, wrapped tightly around the baby, still alert, still unsure. As the city moved past the windows in neon streaks, Henry sat silently in the front seat, his mind trying to make sense of what was happening. Nothing in his life had prepared him for this. And yet, as he glanced at Lily in the rearview mirror, her head tilted protectively over Rose's, he knew with absolute clarity that whatever came next, he couldn't let her go. Not now. Not ever. When they arrived at Henry's apartment, Lily hesitated before stepping out of the car. She held Rose tightly, her arms locked around the baby as if releasing her would mean losing everything. Henry opened the door for her, but didn't rush her. He waited quietly as she looked up at the tall building, the glass exterior glowing under the city lights. It didn't look like a place a child belonged, and she clearly sensed it. Still, after a few moments, she climbed out barefoot and cautious, her clothes wrinkled and her face unreadable. Henry led her through the lobby without drawing attention. The concierge started to ask something, but Henry gave a quiet shake of the head. No questions. Upstairs, his penthouse looked even more sterile than usual. The sleek furniture, minimal decoration, and cold lighting stood in stark contrast to the warmth of the child clinging to the infant in her arms. Henry noticed it immediately and realized how absurd it was. This fortress of wealth and power, completely unprepared for something so human. He led Lily to the guest room, the only one with a bed that wasn't draped in documents or devices. She walked in and stopped at the doorway, surveying the space. Henry gently offered, "You can sleep here. I'll be right down the hall." She looked at the bed, the blanket, the window, and then back at him. Is there a lock? She asked softly. He blinked. On the inside, she nodded. Yes, there is. She walked inside without another word. Henry stepped out and let her settle. He didn't want to overwhelm her, not after everything she had just done. In the kitchen, he made warm milk, unsure if it was more for her or the baby. He returned a few minutes later and found Lily sitting on the bed, still holding Rose, the baby now half asleep. She accepted the milk, but didn't drink right away. I'm not supposed to talk to strangers, she said quietly. That's smart, Henry replied. You shouldn't, but I want to help. And I won't do anything without your permission. She looked at him again, still studying him with the kind of suspicion most adults couldn't hold. Why did you stop? She asked. You didn't have to. He considered his answer carefully. I don't know, but I'm glad I did. That night, Lily slept in her clothes, curled on one side of the bed with Rose resting on her chest. Henry watched from the doorway for a few seconds before quietly turning off the light. He stayed up late sitting in his office searching hospital records, Child Protective Services databases, and anything else he could find. He called his assistant and asked her to discreetly locate any information on Madison Gray, the name Lily had mentioned as her mother. Within an hour, he had confirmation. A young woman by that name had been admitted 2 months ago following a severe car crash. She was in a coma and had no known relatives willing to take the children. The girls had been placed in emergency care and eventually in a foster home. The report mentioned Lily escaping. No one had followed up. No one had looked for her. To the system. She had simply vanished. Henry stared at the screen in disbelief. He couldn't imagine a world where a 6-year-old could disappear and not set off alarms. And yet here she was in his home because she'd done what the system couldn't, protect her sister. He leaned back in his chair, exhausted, but unable to rest. The weight of responsibility was unfamiliar. He was used to risk, but calculated risk, measurable outcomes, stock prices. This was something else. Lily and Rose were not liabilities or assets. They were children. Real, vulnerable. And in this moment, his responsibility, he knew that no matter what happened next, he had already crossed a line. There would be no returning to the life he knew before this night. And somehow he didn't want to. The following morning began with a silence that felt different than the one Henry was used to. It wasn't the cold, calculated quiet of an empty apartment before the day's first call. It was cautious, tense, and heavy with unspoken questions. He found Lily already awake, sitting upright in the guest bed with Rose still bundled in her arms. Her hair was messy, her eyes alert, but weary. She hadn't moved from the spot where she'd fallen asleep. Henry knocked softly before entering, holding 2 slices of toast and a cup of warm milk. She didn't say anything as he stepped inside, but she didn't turn him away either. That was progress. He placed the tray on the nightstand and asked gently if Rose had eaten. Lily nodded. She had some of the bottle you made. Then she added, she didn't cry much last night. Henry sat in the chair near the window, careful not to get too close. You did good, Lily. You kept her safe. And warm. She looked at him with a mixture of pride and suspicion. I had to. They don't care in that place. They kept saying someone would come, but no one came. Her voice cracked only at the end, but she quickly straightened herself and kissed Rose on the forehead. I'm not going back, she added. Even if they find me. Henry didn't offer empty reassurances. Instead, he said what he meant. You're not going anywhere right now. You're safe here. That seemed to calm her slightly. She took the toast in one hand while still holding her sister with the other, eating slowly, methodically, as if she was used to making every bite last. Henry asked her if she had any allergies, and she shook her head. He didn't press her with questions, but she eventually offered fragments on her own. She talked about the day her mother didn't come home. About a strange man in a suit who came to get them. About the shelter that smelled like bleach and old food. About how babies cried all night. And how some of the older kids pushed her. About how no one noticed when she waited near the door and left with Rose in her arms. By late morning, Henry's assistant, Dana, arrived with clothes, diapers, formula, and a few toys. She didn't ask questions either. She had worked for Henry long enough to know when something mattered more than it seemed. Lily flinched when she saw Dana at first, but relaxed when the woman smiled and handed her a soft pink sweater. "I thought you might like this one," Dana said. Lily took it and nodded, though she didn't change right away. Trust, Henry realized, was going to be earned inch by inch. In the early afternoon, Dr. Kina arrived to check on Rose. Lily didn't want to let go, so the doctor worked around her. Rose's weight was slightly low, but her reflexes were strong and her heart was steady. "She's resilient," the doctor said quietly to Henry. "And so is the one carrying her." Later that day, Lily finally explored the apartment. She didn't run or skip or ask for anything. She simply walked slowly from room to room, still holding Rose, still measuring the space as if it might vanish at any moment. She stopped in the kitchen, eyeing the counter filled with bottles and sterilizing equipment Dana had set up. "Is this all for her?" she asked. Henry nodded. "Yes, just in case you need it." Lily bit her lip and said, "They never had this stuff where we were." "I had to make bottles with cold water." He didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded again, silently, promising she'd never have to do that again. That evening, as Henry sat across from her at the dinner table, he noticed how her posture had changed, less guarded, more present. She ate half a bowl of soup and watched him closely the entire time. Finally, she asked, "What do you do? Are you rich or something?" The question caught him off guard, but he answered truthfully. "I run a big company." "I used to think that mattered most." Lily frowned thoughtfully. But now he looked at her and then at Rose, sleeping beside her in a baby carrier Dana had brought. "Now I'm not so sure." Lily didn't respond. She just kept eating slowly as if digesting more than just food. Henry knew the next steps wouldn't be simple, but for the first time in years, he didn't feel alone in the quiet. The fifth day began with rain streaking down the tall windows of Henry's apartment, softening the edges of the skyline and making the usually sharp, bright view look almost muted. Lily stood by the glass, her forehead pressed lightly against the pane, watching water race toward the bottom in thin streams. She wasn't holding Rose for once, just watching, her small hands folded in front of her like she was waiting for something she couldn't quite name. Henry walked in carrying a fresh bottle and noticed how quiet she was. "She's still sleeping," Lily said without turning around. "She had a good night." Henry nodded, placing the bottle on the counter. "That's because you've been doing everything right," he replied. Lily finally turned to face him and hesitated before asking, "Do you think my mom will wake up?" The question landed with the weight of everything she hadn't said since she arrived. Henry walked over slowly and sat at the edge of the nearby couch, not pushing her to sit with him. "I hope so," he said honestly. "She's still fighting, and the doctors are doing everything they can." Lily gave a small nod and then looked back out the window. She used to sing to Rose every night, even if she was tired. She'd sing the same song, and Rose would fall asleep in seconds. Her voice trembled just once, but she blinked away the emotion. She loved her so much, both of us, even when she was working 3 jobs and we only had toast for dinner. Henry listened without interruption. Each detail Lily gave was more than just a memory. It was proof that someone had loved her fiercely and without conditions. It made the entire situation feel even heavier. Madison Gray wasn't an absent mother. She had fought. She had done what she could. And now she was lying unconscious while her daughter tried to protect what little remained of their world. Henry couldn't imagine what it would feel like to carry that kind of weight at 6 years old. Later that afternoon, Henry received a call from Evelyn, one of his most trusted legal advisors. She had found the documentation regarding Lily and Rose's placement in state care. The report was vague, filled with formal language and minimal follow-up. There had been no official search ordered after Lily's disappearance. The assumption had been that she would eventually return or be found by authorities. Evelyn also discovered that no immediate family had come forward to claim custody. The only distant relative, a paternal uncle, had declined involvement. That knowledge created a strange mix of relief and outrage in Henry. How could a system lose track of a child so easily? How could no one even try to look? Evelyn's voice turned more serious. "If you want to take temporary guardianship," she said, "we can begin the process today. But it's going to involve some visibility. Paperwork oversight." Henry didn't hesitate. "Do whatever it takes," he said. "I'm not letting them go back to a shelter." That evening, after Rose had been bathed and changed, Lily sat on the couch beside Henry with a coloring book open in front of her. She wasn't drawing anything in particular, just soft lines across the page like it helped her think. "You're different from the other adults," she said suddenly. "Most people ask what happened. You didn't." Henry leaned back in the chair, arms crossed loosely. "I figured you'd tell me when you were ready," he replied. She nodded slowly, satisfied with the answer. "They told me at the shelter that families break," she added after a pause. "But maybe they don't always stay broken." It wasn't a question, but Henry treated it like one. "No," he said quietly. "Sometimes someone shows up when you don't expect them, and they help put the pieces back together." Lily looked over at him and smiled, small but genuine. It was the first time he'd seen her face soften like that. Then she picked up a purple crayon and began to draw again. This time forming shapes instead of lines. Henry didn't ask what it was. He didn't need to. He just sat there watching her and listening to Rose breathe softly in the carrier nearby, and realized this moment, quiet and unscripted, was more valuable than anything he'd ever built with a pen or a contract. The 6th day began before sunrise. Henry was already awake, sitting at the kitchen counter with a mug of coffee growing cold in his hands, while the city outside still dozed under a pale blue haze. He hadn't slept much, but it wasn't from stress or exhaustion the way it used to be in his old life. It was a new kind of restlessness, the kind that came from caring too deeply and not knowing what tomorrow would bring. He heard soft footsteps behind him and turned to see Lily barefoot and wrapped in a blanket, her hair tousled and her eyes still heavy with sleep. She didn't speak right away, but walked to the refrigerator and poured herself a glass of water without asking. That in itself was progress. Henry motioned toward the chair across from him and she sat down, keeping the blanket over her knees. "Rose is still sleeping," she said. "She had a little cough last night, but it stopped." He nodded, making a mental note to mention it to Dr. Kinnear when she came by for the scheduled checkup. Lily sipped her water and then looked at him. "You're not like the people in the office. You don't wear your watch anymore." He glanced at his wrist and realized she was right. The heavy silver timepiece that had once dictated his day had been sitting untouched on his desk all week. "I guess I lost track of time," he said, and Lily gave a tiny, almost imperceptible smile. Later that morning, Dr. Kinnear arrived with a gentle knock in her usual calm presence. Lily allowed her to examine Rose without hesitation. This time, even stepping back a little to give her room. Rose's vitals were stable, her color better, and the doctor noted her growing strength with cautious optimism. After the exam, Dr. Kinnear sat with Henry in the living room while Lily fed Rose. "They're settling into a rhythm," she said. "But you know this can't remain informal forever. CPS will catch up eventually, especially if there's been a missing child report." Henry nodded, already expecting that reality. "We've started the paperwork for temporary guardianship," he said. "I want it to be official. I want them protected." Dr. Kinnear hesitated, then asked, "Do you understand what that means, Henry?" "Not just legally, but emotionally. These girls will need more than safety. They'll need permanence. They'll need presence. Henry looked over at Lily, who was now lying on the floor beside Rose, letting the baby curl her hand around one of her fingers. I've spent most of my life building things that don't matter anymore, he said. This does. That afternoon, Evelyn stopped by with the official forms. Lily watched as Henry signed them at the kitchen table, one after the other, his pen steady and deliberate. She didn't ask what the papers were for, but when he looked up and caught her watching, he said, "These are so I can make sure no one takes you or Rose away without going through me first." Lily blinked, then nodded as if something inside her had finally shifted. She didn't say thank you. She just walked over and hugged him, not tightly, not dramatically, but with intention. And that was more than enough. As night fell, Henry noticed how quiet the apartment had become, not from absence, but from peace. Lily had tucked Rose into the crib Dana had brought earlier that day, a soft lullaby playing quietly in the background. Then she came to Henry and handed him one of her drawings, a picture of a tall building with a little girl and a baby in the window and a man standing next to them. "It's us," she said simply. "But I made the building look warmer." Henry took the drawing and looked at it for a long time. The lines weren't perfect, and the colors bled at the edges, but it was the most honest piece of art he had ever seen. That night, as he turned off the lights and made one last check on the girls, Henry realized that for the first time in his life, the silence around him didn't feel like loneliness. It felt like home. The seventh day began with a sense of waiting, the kind that comes when something is shifting just beneath the surface. Henry could feel it as he watched Lily eat her cereal with one hand while holding Rose with the other. Her movements automatic now, like they had always lived like this. She had grown more confident in the past few days, not in a loud or playful way, but in the small, quiet choices she made. Pouring her own milk, brushing her hair without being asked, folding Rose's tiny clothes, and stacking them neatly on the dresser in the guest room. Henry noticed these things the way someone notices sunlight through closed blinds. He didn't comment, but each detail stayed with him. That morning, he received a message from the hospital. Madison Gray, Lily, and Rose's mother, had shown signs of responsiveness. She had opened her eyes briefly during the night. A nurse had recorded her attempting to mouth words. Though she wasn't fully awake, it was the most hopeful update since her accident. Henry sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the message for several minutes before deciding what to do next. He called Dana and asked her to clear his schedule. Then he walked to the guest room where Lily was changing Rose's diaper and gently told her the news. Lily froze, her hands still. "She's waking up?" she asked, not quite believing it. Henry nodded. "It's early, but yes. They think it's the beginning." He offered to take her to the hospital. She didn't answer right away. Her eyes flickered to Rose, then back to Henry. "Only if she can come with us," she said. He promised she could. Within the hour, they were in the car, the city blurring past them under a soft, overcast sky. Henry drove in silence, glancing occasionally in the mirror to see Lily looking out the window, her arms wrapped protectively around Rose as if bracing for the worst, even as hope crept in. When they arrived, the nurse greeted them at the ICU doors and led them through. Lily's steps slowed as they approached the room, and when they finally reached the glass panel outside Madison's bed, she stopped completely. Henry placed a hand on her shoulder, but didn't say anything. Inside, Madison lay still, but her eyes were partially open. A soft beep echoed from the monitors. Her body was thinner than Lily remembered, her skin pale and fragile, but she was there. Present, real. Lily took a step forward, then another, and finally entered the room while Henry waited just outside. Lily stood at her mother's bedside and said nothing for several minutes. Then she leaned in, gently touched Madison's hand, and whispered, "I didn't leave her, Mom. I kept her safe." Madison's eyelids fluttered, and her mouth moved slightly. No words, but recognition sparked faintly in her expression. Lily kept talking, barely above a whisper, telling her mother how Rose had cried, how they had hidden, how someone kind found them. "His name is Henry," she added. "He didn't ask questions. He just helped." When Lily returned to the hallway, she looked up at Henry with red-rimmed eyes, but a calm expression. "She knew me," she said. "I think she did." Henry nodded, placing a hand over hers briefly. "That matters." Later, as they sat in the hospital cafe with Rose sleeping in a carrier between them, Lily said something unexpected. "If she gets better, I think she'll need help, too, like me." Henry watched her for a moment, realizing again how much weight this child had carried. "You won't have to carry it alone anymore," he said. "Whatever happens next, I'm here." She didn't speak, but her hand reached out and held his on the table, small fingers curled over his knuckles. It wasn't dramatic or tearful. It was quiet and steady, the kind of connection born not from grand gestures, but from choosing to stay. That evening, back at the apartment, Lily drew another picture and placed it on Henry's desk without a word. It showed a hospital bed, a window, and a girl holding a baby while someone stood nearby with a hand on her shoulder. At the top, in careful handwriting, it said, "We're not alone now." Henry stared at it long after Lily had gone to bed, wondering how a drawing from a 6-year-old could feel more profound than anything he'd ever signed in his office. On the 8th day, everything changed in a way that didn't feel dramatic or loud, but like a shift in gravity, subtle, irreversible, and deeply felt. The morning began like the others, with sunlight stretching softly across the floor and the scent of warm oatmeal drifting through the apartment. Lily had begun to wake up without needing to check her surroundings first. She moved with quiet certainty now, feeding Rose, brushing her hair, asking for things she needed without hesitation. There was no fear in her voice anymore. There was steadiness, a rhythm that had taken root in just a week, but felt like it had always been there. Henry watched her carry Rose to the couch, placing the baby in the small bouncer seat with practiced hands. He realized that she hadn't once asked if they would have to leave. The question had faded, replaced by something unspoken but understood. This was home now, and she believed it. It wasn't something Henry had declared. It had become true because he had shown her every day that he was staying. That afternoon, they went back to the hospital. Madison had woken more fully that morning. The doctor had called to say she was conscious, though weak and beginning to speak in short phrases. Henry let Lily walk into the room on her own. He stood outside again, hands in his pockets, listening to the gentle sounds of machines humming and Rose gurgling quietly in the carrier. Inside, Lily sat by her mother and took her hand. Madison turned her head slowly, her voice barely audible but full of emotion. She said Lily's name. Lily's reply was calm and certain. "I'm okay. I took care of Rose and we're safe now." They stayed longer this time. Madison was still recovering, but her awareness was clear and the bond between her and Lily was unmistakable. When Henry finally stepped in, Madison looked at him with tired, grateful eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, and he nodded without needing to respond. There was a moment of mutual understanding, quiet and deeply human. They both had one thing in common. They had tried to protect these children, each in their own way. And somehow they had managed to meet in the middle of that effort. In the days that followed, Madison began regaining her strength. The hospital team started to plan for her rehabilitation, and a social worker entered the conversation, suggesting a long-term care plan that included monitored support for the family. But when asked what she wanted for her daughters, Madison gave a response no one expected. She looked at Henry and said, "If anything happens to me again, they need someone who won't disappear. Someone they already trust. I want him there." Henry didn't speak. He simply reached across the table and took the document the social worker slid forward. When he signed it, it wasn't as a businessman securing another asset. It was as a man choosing to belong to someone for real with all the responsibility and love that came with it. Months passed. Madison recovered slowly but steadily, and she remained a part of Lily and Rose's lives. She came over often, shared dinners, sometimes stayed the night in the guest room that used to be only Lily's. It wasn't a traditional arrangement, but it worked. Built on trust and care, not control. Lily started school again. Henry walked her to the gate on her first day. Rose began to giggle every time Henry picked her up. Dana added a photo of the girls to the front of her planner without being asked. One evening, as Henry tucked Lily in, she asked him quietly, "Are you going to be my dad forever?" He didn't answer right away. He sat on the edge of her bed, brushing a curl from her face. "Do you want me to be?" She nodded without hesitation. "Yes, you already are." He leaned down and kissed her forehead. "Then I will be." That night Henry stood by the window, watching the city lights flicker below. His reflection in the glass looked different now, not harder or older, but fuller. He had spent so long chasing purpose in the form of progress, in numbers and titles. But purpose had found him in a grocery store aisle, wrapped in the arms of a little girl holding her baby sister. And now, finally, he understood what it meant to build something that couldn't be bought, something that mattered, a family, a future, a life. This ending is not just a conclusion to a story. It's the result of a deeply personal transformation. Henry Mathis, a man from a world built on numbers, control, and distance, undergoes a change that doesn't happen in a single moment and isn't portrayed as a miracle. It grows through actions, through quiet decisions, through trust that's earned one day at a time. What makes this ending especially powerful is that no one becomes perfect. Madison doesn't magically recover. Henry doesn't save everyone with one gesture. And Lily doesn't suddenly become a carefree child. This is a story about how a real family can be formed not through biology, but through choice, deliberate, repeated, and tested by time. The ending is honest, without drama, but filled with deep hope. And that makes it stronger than any fairy tale. Because this isn't everything is perfect. This is we're going to stay together no matter what. And that means everything.